Summer has ended and we're now officially in fall. Welcome to Ghost Stories with Kitten, where we read true, paranormal stories read to you by a real human and not AI. Let's go. I'm an undertaker and something happened. Something happened and I've always been skeptical. Until today, that is. As I said, I'm an undertaker. And I have been for the past 8 years. I've always been skeptical when it comes to the afterlife, especially the paranormal. But today, something happened that I cannot explain. I was cleaning unclaimed ashes out of a funeral home where I work. We're moving out of an old Victorian building that we operate out of into a new funeral home. For the past week, we've been making a slow transition, moving out of our current home and into the new one. In our basement, we still have many unclaimed ashes, going as far back as the 1970s. I just had my headphones in, putting the boxes into bags so we could send them to the local crematorium to have them be scattered. I must have put away hundreds of boxes of ashes without even thinking about it. You know, narrator, it's actually kind of sad. I guess I never considered what happens to someone if a body isn't claimed, or kind of what happens to you, and I guess this answers it. Anyway, I was just listening to a podcast, getting another task ticked off my to-do list. I was putting one box in the bag and felt my body and brain freeze with the word no. But I didn't hear anything. It's hard to explain to you what I felt. The best I can explain is that my own free will had gone from me, and I was ordered to stop immediately what I was doing. I did, I stopped, and I put the box of ashes in my hand onto the table. On closer inspection, there were 2 boxes I was going to put in separate bags. One small box, and one normal-sized one. Let's just say for privacy reasons, one box was labelled Hannah Williams. On top of Hannah Williams' ashes, there was a box labelled Baby Williams, and I presume they are mother and baby, who I was about to separate into 2 separate bags. God, this is so sad, it's hard to read, which I find quite spooky because I didn't read the labels before this. I was doing a mundane task as fast as I could with my existing duties and clearing the premises. I was just trying to get things done as fast as possible. I was not paying attention to the names. I just needed to get this done. So yeah, I cannot explain this for the life of me. I cannot come up with an explanation for what I heard, but I really did hear it. I'm not scared, nor am I excited about what I felt. I just genuinely feel confused about the whole situation. For time, I stayed a few nights in an empty house. Back around 1991, my then girlfriend and her family moved out of state. They had packed up their entire house and put it on the market. This was during the recession, and her dad got a really great offer out of state that he couldn't refuse. They live on the other side of town from me, in the older area of town, but it's still nice. The homes were huge and kind of ranch style with huge lots. Their home was a 4-bedroom, 2-bath house with a detached garage, huge driveway that fit their boat and RV, and they were not really that close to neighbours, meaning that the plots of homes were not spaced too close together. I remember the house had one huge tree out front that covered most of the front driveway, and over to the garage, the backyard had 2 or 3 smaller trees. I remember one of them was a fruit tree. Maybe it was oranges. When they packed up everything, I was helping them pack their home up, and when I was doing so, her dad pulled me aside to the porch with her mum. Her dad had asked me if he could trust me with something. I knew her parents loved me and trusted me, so I wasn't sure what they wanted, but I would have done anything for them. They said that until the realtor sells the house, if I wouldn't mind stopping in every few days just to check on the place. Her dad hands me the keys and says if you could maybe help us with cleaning up the place a little bit too. He started to give me some cash and I told him no, but I would be happy to do it for them. I knew they were going through a tough spot, and so I told them not to worry about anything, but I would clean and make sure that everything would be okay. He seemed really worried about leaving the house alone. He said if he could maybe stay a night or two just so people don't think the place is abandoned. He said that the guy across the street is on vacation, and he was the only neighbor that he could trust. During that time, there were issues of people breaking into foreclosed homes and removing appliances and even squatting. I told him for sure that I would plan on spending a few nights there a week or whatever needed. He said call us if you need anything, but we would take them a few days of travel to get to their new place. Her dad had a cell phone, but back then it wasn't like today. But he gave me my girlfriend's grandmother's phone number and said she would know how to get in touch with them. The first few days I did as they asked. I cleaned up the kitchen, the bathrooms, I vacuumed everything, and I started doing other little chores like windows, wiping down the walls and stuff like that. The first night, I stayed the entire night. I told my parents that I was going to work all night, like it was a Friday and I'd planned to come back home the following morning. There was a there was a cot, a radio and a few lights, nothing else. I decided to sleep in my girlfriend's old room. Part of me just missed her at that point, and I didn't know how long it was going to be until I saw her again. I fell asleep with the radio playing low in the room. It left a couple of lights on, the kitchen light on and the front bathroom light on, if I remember correctly. During the first night, I woke up in the middle of the night freezing cold. It was fall, and the temperatures could dip down on night time, but this felt like something else. It felt like a cold from some kind of other source, just being like inside a fridge. I got up, I turned on the house heater, and went back to the cot, and bundled up with my sleeping bag. When I got home the next night, I had mentioned to my friend about how cold it got the night before. Apparently it wasn't even a cold night outside. Over the following days, I would stop by the house during the day, check on the house. I would take time to finish up my homework and then go home. I think the next time I slept over was on a Thursday night. I remember because I had school the next day and planned out how I was going to get to school from their house, as they lived further from my school than I did. I got to their house later in the evening. It was almost dark. This time, I'd brought a little camping TV that was black and white and had little bunny ears. That's cute. So I could have a little entertainment. However, the TV didn't want to get a signal in my girlfriend's old room. So, I moved to their den. Their den was like an add-on. It must have been a patio or something at some point, because you could tell it wasn't part of the original house. I set up my cot, brought a thermos of hot chocolate, and turned on my TV, was watching TV and started to fall asleep. Then, I heard a noise that came from the other side of the house. It sounded like, well, you know, if you lean a broom handle against a wall and it falls over, but it slides down the wall, and that was what it sounded like. I get up to check on whatever made the noise. I didn't see anything, and the broom and mop were in the kitchen pantry, and they were still upright. I then went to the bathroom, and I swear I heard someone whisper, like saying a sentence. I remember what her dad said about watching out for people trying to break in and steal stuff. So I ran around the house, turning on all the lights. A lot of the rooms didn't have ceiling lights, so I turned on what I could. I turned on the backyard lights, the porch lights, checked all of the doors, and everything was locked. Nothing was open. I go back to the den. My little TV is now off. I know I left it on. I start getting the chills. I can honestly say I didn't sleep at all that night. The next day at school, I told a couple of friends about it, and they wanted to come over. I told them that her dad had asked me not to have people over or throw a party or anything like that, not that I even would have. I was split between asking a friend to join me or keeping my word. I decided to keep my word. The next few days I only checked in on my house, and that Sunday my girlfriend called me at home. She asked me how I was doing. She was talking about their road trip to their new house. I was kind of quiet or something because I remember her asking me, "Okay, what's wrong with you?" Other than me telling her that I missed her. I didn't want to seem like I was some kind of kid scared of being in his home all alone. I told her to let her dad know that I stayed over a few times and went to check on the house almost every day. I think I also reminded them to cancel their paper because it was still coming. She then says, "Any issues being alone now?" I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Nothing's bothering you?" I told her, well, I got a really cold spell in her room, but I heard noises and I swear I heard some kind of whispering. She said, "Yeah, I kind of figured you would find out." I said, "Kathy, what are you talking about?" She said, "Well, remember how I told you I never liked to be at home alone?" And I said, "Yeah. Sometimes she would call me over when her parents were not home so that she wasn't home alone." I said, "Is your house haunted or something?" She said, "Well, I'm not sure haunted or something, it's just there, but yeah, we would hear noises and see things." She went on to tell me stories about how when she was a kid and they moved in there, that she would run to her parents' room and sleep on the edge of their bed. And I was like, "Okay, great, thanks for telling me." She said, "I didn't want you to think it was weird." She said, "Oh, my dad said you don't have to stay the night there anymore. The neighbor across the street is back from vacation. He will keep an eye on the place at night. However, he did ask if I still wouldn't mind going by at least every other day." I kept that up for a few days, making sure to hit the house only during daylight time. As the weeks went on, the days got shorter, and then one evening I arrived at the house after 7. It was already dark outside. I opened up the front door, turned on some lights and went to use the restroom. And as I was doing so, I was facing the toilet and had one of those bathrooms, they had one of those bathrooms with a mirror that went across the whole wall. I could see into the hallway from the bathroom. I suddenly then see something like a figure go by really fast, and I yelled out loud, "Hello?" I left that house so fast, I left the bathroom light on and the hall light on. A day later, Kathy's dad asked if I left the light on because the neighbors saw that the lights were still on and said that they saw me inside. I said, "Yeah, I stopped by about 7, checked on everything and left." He said, "No, this was like at 11 p.m. And I said, "No, that wasn't me." I went there a few more times, and then the realtor took over and sold the house to a company that brought up homes. I was so glad to never have to go back there again. I encountered the spirits of 2 dead friends when I was a child. I will try to explain the story as detailed as I can. This whole encounter is something that stuck with me ever since, and just recently I've gotten more curious about it again. I thought I should say maybe I'll share it with some people, perhaps to get opinions on it, etc. When I was a child, I think I was about 8 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night with my face facing the wall. I noticed a blue light emanating from my room because it was reflected on the wall that I was facing. As I turned around, I noticed 2 spirits in my room. They were human silhouettes that were emitting blue light. The core was very bright, almost white, but the rest was blue. Now this is where it gets interesting. I immediately somehow knew who they were. Not in absolute detail, but I knew their backstory somehow. I knew that they had just recently died, maybe even as much as a few hours or days beforehand. They were the souls of 2 young men, friends in their 20s, who had died in a car crash after drunk driving at night. I also knew that they were at a party beforehand and had gotten drunk there, got in their car afterwards to go home and then crashed. both died on impact at the scene. It's hard to explain, but it was really the moment that I saw them that I instantly somehow knew all of this information, but not more than that. But now let's get into the actual interaction. I saw them both standing in front of a bed where my mum was sleeping. She was sleeping in the same room as me, but in another bed that was across the room, so basically still sort of next to me. One of the guys was bending over my mother, while the other was standing next to him. This is the part super weird, but a very important detail. The guy that was hovering over my mother was opening up her night blouse buttons. Excuse me? Do not like that, ghost. I saw him actively doing it, and I was just very confused. The guy next to him started noticing it, and noticed that I was awake and looking at them, and at that point the other guy, that was busy with her buttons, looked up as well, and they both looked at me again. These two were just silhouettes of blue/white light. I couldn't make any faces, etc. from them, but I could tell they were looking right at me. One of them, and I don't remember which, started testing me to see if I was actually looking at them. They both seemed very perplexed by the fact that I could somehow see them. After they finally realized I was, indeed, actually looking at them, they started to walk away from the scene. Another important detail here is that they actually walked, as in I could see their legs moving like regular humans. And then they disappeared through the wall behind my door. During this whole encounter, I was more confused by everything and scared. My eyes were fixed on them because I was so shocked, yet intrigued at the same time. The next morning, I basically got confirmation that this whole thing actually happened, because indeed my mum's blouse buttons were opened. They definitely weren't open before, and she said she didn't open them herself. There's no way, because her whole chest was also almost peeking fully out. Okie dokie. I knew they did this on purpose because they realized they could do whatever they wanted in their new world, but they didn't expect me to catch them in the middle of it. It also felt like that they knew, but I knew about the backstory, and that somehow startled them. In general, it just seemed like they were more scared of me than the other way around. I only got really scared afterwards because I realized this thing could actually have happened, and it was not normal. I was specifically scared that they were going to come back through the wall behind my door. Up until I was a teenager, I was terrified of sleeping in rooms with their doors not fully open or fully closed, because that's how they'd gotten out of my room before. I thought they might want to return, because they saw me as a form of connection/bridge perhaps to our dimension. I wasn't scared of them doing anything bad. I think you should have been, just of them returning in general. Having this knowledge, at 8 years old, just seems too much for me to somehow just be the imagination of a child. Drunk driving, and the consequence of that, buttoning up shirts for certain reasons, etc. Also, it was more than just, say, a few seconds long and then somehow they disappeared. It must have been several minutes. And the trauma of it lasted well up until my teen years. Now I'm 22. And my last few days I got super curious about this encounter once again. So I started digging on the internet to find any news about 2 guys dying in a car crash in my area around that time. And what a surprise! I actually found one with the help of ChatGPT. On the 29th of January in 2012, on the night of Saturday to Sunday, 2 guys, ages 19 and 20, crashed their car into a tree after trying to overtake another car. They both died instantly on impact at the scene. It's the only article about it and super short. Not any details beside that. The moment I read that, I felt an instant click, as in, this must have been them. During that time, I was actually 8 years old. It's interesting. I don't remember the exact date of the encounter, but to me it always felt like it happened during the first half of the year, so the timeline then would also fit. I'm from a small town in Germany. There's absolutely no way that I would have just heard about it back then when I was a kid, and made this whole thing up or had all of the information I got. I would actually bet my entire life on it. The article doesn't mention a party or drunk driving, but it's a realistic scenario to me. It would also fit because it was a Saturday/Sunday night and 2 younger guys. Ever since that encounter, I felt spiritually more connected to things like that. At some point, I randomly started having OBEs, out-of-body experiences, and developed a very deep and strong intuition. But I've never had another encounter like that. I also feel like I'm somewhat connected to them. I want to know if there's actually a possibility of that. I've never seen them again, or anything like that. I'm curious to know what you all think about it, and what the whole thing means, perhaps on a bigger level. Was this encounter just a coincidence? Was I maybe meant to witness it? I have so many questions still in my head. If you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I also apologize for any spelling or grammar mistakes. I'm not a native speaker. Don't worry, your grammar was just fine. Bill Manor. Alright. So I don't know if this forum is to talk about actual ghost encounters, or it's supposed to be just spooky story stuff. Your narrator here, it should be used for true, real paranormal encounters. So this is an actual encounter that just happened recently to me. I took my wife on a private haunt in a supposedly haunted manor. The history on this manor is pretty boring. Nothing like a murderous rampage or massive death toll. Just the typical 1800s stuff. We got the whole manor to ourselves for $175 a night. And I thought, hey, why not? She's into it. Okay. So, everything was very quiet for hours. But we went to leave to get something to eat about 1 a.m. And, we'd been throwing cat balls around the house all day. You know, little things with the bells in them. I went to grab something off the table, and a cat bell flew across the room and ding, and I didn't even react because I just figured, yeah, whatever. So I turned around to say, haha, very funny, but there was nobody there, because the other two were already down on the porch, down the steps and into the car. I was in the house by myself. I don't believe in this shit, but after all this, I don't know what to think. Obviously, there's some existence after death, because a cat ball cannot throw itself, and I was certainly intent on letting me know that, because we'd been throwing these balls all night long. It felt like a taunt somehow, so yeah, I'm confused. Very confused. I have many, many more questions than I had before I went in. I was a Christian at the time, and I lost my faith, and then now this. I know one cat ball shouldn't be able to alter one's beliefs, but damn. When it's thrown by something that isn't there, it certainly catches your attention. That's my story about Bill Manor. Believe it or not, I don't care. If you have the stones to experience it for yourself, it's in Fremont, Nowhere, Ohio. If you can find a listing, I'm sure it would welcome another paycheck. I know it's funny, my wife's son was in the kitchen watching surveillance cameras, and he said someone pinched him from behind. He didn't think much of it until he turned around and no one was there. I still have a hard time believing him. Is that strange or what? My mind doesn't seem to want to accept this concept. I wonder if that's a natural reaction, or an ingenious design. Oh my god, I almost forgot the best part. After dropping her son off, we went and ended up falling asleep in the upstairs bedroom for about half an hour before we were supposed to leave. Who does that? Your narrator here. It's interesting that this story about Bill Manor, and I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, it's B-I-H-L, came up because I actually saw a bit of a synchronicity recently about it. It came up on a video recently talking about how haunted this place was in Ohio, and I guess Ghost Adventures had been there, so maybe it is worth checking out. Next story. My girlfriend received a call from a ghost. This happened back in October 2022, close to Halloween. My girlfriend, along with her friend, own a hair salon since the end of 2020. They usually do Instagram posts, appointments, and everything related with social media on an iPhone that they only have and use exclusively for the business. Since they were too close to Halloween, they decided to make an altar inspired by the Day of the Dead on the salon. Context. The Day of the Dead, the Dia de los Muertos, is a celebration in Mexico where you put a stand with pictures of your relatives that have passed away, along with food offerings and things like that, because it's believed that your dead relatives come into spirit to taste things they used to like when they were alive. If you've seen the movie Coco, you might know what I'm talking about. That's a fantastic movie, by the way. The day they put the altar at the salon, everyone went home like usual. She came home, we did our normal routine. I went to sleep, and since she always had trouble falling asleep, she continued watching some series on Netflix. Somewhere around 2 to 3 in the morning, she wakes me up frantically. My first thought was she'd watched some horror movie or something. Maybe she was scared. But she couldn't even talk a whole sentence. She was just pointing at her phone. I hugged her until she calmed down for around 10 minutes, and then she started to say that she received a FaceTime from a phone at the salon. She said that while she was watching the TV, when she started to receive a FaceTime request. Since it was 3 in the morning, she thought it was very unlikely it was her friend, the salon co-worker. But since there were times in where they stayed late to do the material restocking, she probably thought she was there doing that, and probably maybe had an emergency. When she accepted the FaceTime, she only saw the ceiling. She started to say her friend's name, thinking maybe she'd made the FaceTime by accident. But nothing came on the screen. It was only the ceiling and the red light they leave on during the night. She started to have an eerie feeling and ended the FaceTime. Since we have security cameras on the business, she opened up the app on her phone to see what was going on. At this point, she thinks that probably a thief has broken in or something. As soon as she sees the cameras, there's no one there. She puts the camera on reverse to see the exact moment at which she was called. And you can see the phone turn on by itself and make the FaceTime call by itself. And that's when she lost it and woke me up. She said that she can't explain the fact that the phone had a security lock, but only her and her friends need a password to it. And also the fact whoever or whatever was manipulating the phone picked her contact and made a FaceTime. There's no logic to that whole process. A day after, she showed everyone at the salon what had happened, and everyone was in shock, because there was no way the phone did that all by itself at 3 a.m. Never heard of someone else to receive a call from no one. That was the first and last year they made a Day of the Dead thematic altar for the salon, since they got goosebumps every time they remembered what happened. Some attributed the altar that they had made because supposedly you're inviting the dead to wander in your place. 3 years gone by, we still remember that night. Has anyone else ever had a similar situation like ours? Watching spirit presence. So I have a spirit in my house, and for context, I live with my dad and stepmother, and recently I moved back in April after living with my uncle for over a year and finishing school. This was the first time I really experienced presence like this, and I don't really know what it is. But I really only felt it when I was completely alone. I felt it a few weeks ago, when my dad came and my stepmom went out of town to Dallas, and it was just me all alone. Throughout the weekend, I felt like I wasn't alone though, like there was something else with me in the house. And Friday night, I finally came back from eating dinner at Chili's with some of my co-workers at like 11:30, almost 12. They were already gone and in Fort Worth. I didn't really feel much until I started to get ready for bed. As soon as I felt paranoia creep up on me, I opted to sleep in my dad's room because it was the only room with a lock, as I was that paranoid. When I woke up on Saturday morning, I was kind of relieved, but it still felt weird being all alone. I went on about my day. I went to the gym, grocery store, had the shopping, and then, by late afternoon, I went up to Huntsville for my cousin's birthday party. I didn't leave until like 11 at night, and I didn't get home till about 12 something. When I did get home, I really started to feel like I wasn't alone, and again, I slept in my dad's room. It was the strongest on a Saturday night before my dad came home, when I was in the kitchen doing my meal prep well into the night. The entire time, it felt like there was something in the kitchen, and something in the living room with me. You know how you can... Oh, gotta jump. Was that you, Crowley? It's my bird. God, he gave me a start. I love you, Crowley. The entire time, it felt like there was something in the kitchen and in the living room with me. You know when you can feel that there's another person with you, or a bird in my case, how you sort of feel their presence. I felt that here, but obviously didn't see anything. And there was definitely a presence just sitting there and watching me while I cooked and cleaned up the kitchen. I couldn't pinpoint it. It was really unnerving. I was really on edge when I was showering, and especially when I went to bed in my own bedroom. I felt as though there was something right outside my door. I actually called my mum because of how unsettled and on edge I was. She told me how to pray out loud to Jesus to feel better, and I did, and it did lessen that feeling a little. For the most part, I was able to fall asleep. I did tell my dad about it, and he knew exactly what I was talking about. Like when someone else is with you. He had the house cleansed back in 2023, when I was still in school and living with him. But I guess it didn't do much. If anyone has any idea what this possibly is, or any similar experiences, I would love to hear them. Something visited my house while my dad was on his deathbed. I've been a paranormal skeptic my entire life, but this is the one experience I've had that I cannot explain with my usual rationale. This occurred 4 days before my father died. To set the scene, there were 5 people in the house. My dad, who was comatose and near death at this point, and my mum, who has a bedroom upstairs, and then me, my brother, and my granddad, who all have bedrooms downstairs. That night I was up late in my bedroom. Around 2 a.m. I hear a very distinct sound of human footsteps in the hallway outside my room, followed by the hallway light clicking on and off. I clearly heard the click of the light switch, and I saw the light from under my door. I assumed it was my brother, but a few moments later he knocked on my door and asked, "Were you in the hallway just now?" I replied, "No, that wasn't me. I thought it was you." Well, if it wasn't either of us, who the hell was it? The only other people in the house it could have been were my mum and my granddad, but it wasn't my mum. She would have had to descend an extremely creaky staircase to get into the hallway, and we would have heard that from our bedrooms. And the sound of her footsteps did not match my granddad, who drags his feet on the ground and walks with a cane. Confused, I stepped out of my bedroom and went to my granddad's door. I could hear his loud snoring from inside, confirming it was definitely not him. Then I went upstairs and peeked into my parents' room. My mum was fast asleep and snoring as well. Thoroughly freaked out, I checked every other room in the house and verified that all the doors and windows were locked, ruling out the possibility of it being a random intruder. By this point, my brother was nearly in tears because he was so scared. Neither of us were in a joking mood, considering how the family tragedy that we were experiencing was unfolding. So I know he wasn't pulling my leg. The next day I asked my mum if she was up walking in the hallway at 2 a.m. She confirmed that she was asleep and hadn't left her room at all that night. It freaks me out so bad because it's an event that had 2 witnesses, me and my brother. We both heard and saw the exact same thing. We were up for nearly 2 hours afterwards, scared as hell, trying to come up with some rational explanation. But we have none. Maybe it was an angel of death. Maybe it was a dead relative visiting my dad. Maybe it was a demon because the vibes in the house were so depressing at that point. I have no clue. But that's the one, and hopefully only, paranormal experience I've ever had. If anybody has any ideas about what it could have been, please let me know. Still haunts me today. I used to rent a flat in Leeds, one of those tall Victorian terraces that had been hacked into a student housing decades ago. From the outside, it looked almost grand, tall windows, soot-stained brick, and an iron railing out front. But inside, it was the usual patchwork, paper-thin walls, carpets that smelled faintly of damp, and the floorboards that shrieked if you so much as shifted your weight on them. It wasn't perfect, but it was cheap. When you're a student, cheap is king. First, it was just an old house, drafty, yes, moody plumbing, sure, but nothing I couldn't live with. It was until winter set in. That's when I started waking up. Always around 3 a.m, I'd sit bolt upright, heart pounding, certain that I'd heard something. It was always the same sound. The floorboards in the hallway creaking. Now, in a house that old, creaks aren't unusual. But it wasn't a random groan of timber, it was rhythmic, steady, like footsteps slow and deliberate, creeping closer to me. I asked my housemates, half expecting them to laugh and confess they were sneaking around. They swore they were all asleep. And every morning, without fail, the locks were bolted from the inside. No one had gone out. No one had come in. Weeks passed and the pattern didn't break. I'd wake up at 3, hear the creaks, and then silence. Some nights it stopped halfway down the hall, others it came right up to my bedroom door. I started leaving a lamp on at night, but it didn't help. The light only made the shadows on the door sharper, and that's where I began to notice them, the shadows of feet. At first I thought my mind was playing tricks, but no, they were really there, still and waiting, the weight of something pressed close to the other side of the door. I never opened it. One night I decided to be brave, or stupid. I sat up in bed, covers pulled tightly, and I waited. Sure enough, 3 o'clock, the boards began to complain, creak, pause, creak, closer and closer until they stopped right outside my door. I fixed my eyes on the thin gap beneath the door, the faint strip of light where shadows betray what stands beyond. The feet were there again, just as I'd seen before, 2 solid shapes, motionless. But then something happened that froze the blood in my veins. The shadows changed. Instead of walking away, they lowered, slowly, deliberately. They dropped down until the dark shapes stretched flat against the floor. Whoever, whatever, was outside my door wasn't standing anymore. It was lying there, listening. I didn't sleep that night. I don't think I even blinked. I just sat there, locked in a staring contest with the space under the door, waiting for the shadow to move again. Eventually, the first pale of light of dawn crept in, and the hallway was empty. After that, I stopped pretending. I slept in the library some nights. I started carrying my keys everywhere, even inside the flat, and still the footsteps came. Sometimes faint, sometimes heavy, always around 3 a.m, always stopping at my door. When my lease finally ended, I almost didn't bother mentioning it to the landlord, but at the last minute I did, half a joke, half confession. He didn't laugh. He went pale. "Which room were you in?" he asked, and when I told him and his face tightened. He explained that before the Parisians, the whole house had been one unit, back in the 1950s. A man who had lived there had been found dead in the hallway, stretched out flat, face down, right outside what later became my bedroom door. He never figured out why he was lying there, what he'd been doing in his final moments before his death. I moved on, different city, different life. But even now, years later, I wake up in the small hours, and I hold my breath and listen, because sometimes, in silence, I swear I hear it again, the slow creak of footsteps, the pause outside the door, and then that dreadful shifting sound as something lowers itself to the floor. The haunted farmhouse. A few years ago, my dad told me that we were going to visit my grandmother in Virginia. She'd been living there for quite a few years. I asked my dad if that's where he'd grown up. He said no. I asked where then, and he told me that he'd grown up in an old former farmhouse in West Virginia. He told me that a few strange things had happened there, and that his mother had become convinced that the place was haunted. A recounting of the first story is typed below. It happened when my dad, he was only a kid then, and his mum were first moving into the house. My grandmother's mum was coming over to help them move boxes into the attic. While my grandma was doing this, she was talking on the phone with her mum, and a cat ran up the stairs into the attic. She shut the door and moved to leave the room when she heard coming from the attic, "Kitty, Kitty, where did you go?" The sound came from the attic, but apparently my grandmother's mum heard the noise, heard it as if it were coming from the phone, and asked her mother, "Did you hear that?" "I did," she responded. "Now you get out of our house right now, and I'll be over to pick you up, the two of you, and you can stay at my house tonight." And at that moment, the door to the attic opened, and the cat came out, eyes wide, hair standing on end, yowling as it raced out of the house. It never came back. I did say that there were multiple ghostly happenings in that old farmhouse. My dad and his mum did not move out of the house after they heard the voice in the attic, which strangely could also be heard from the telephone. In the parlour room of the house was a large oaken bookcase, bolted firmly to the wall. Displayed on the bookshelf were about a dozen fancy gold-lined plates. One afternoon, when my grandmother came home from a store, my father was at a friend's house, she found that the entire bookshelf had been ripped off from a wall and was now lying mangled in the middle of the room. However, the gold-lined plates were now piled in a neat row on top of a counter. My dad said that ghosts often remove things that they do not like, or at least that's what the common theory is. My father is no believer in ghosts, but I am. Another thing about this house is that my dad said there was a discoloured splotch on the kitchen floor in front of the sink. It was coloured like blood, apparently. But it creaked when someone would step on it, and the story was that after the family that owned the farmhouse eventually sold it, and for a time it became a hotel. At one point, a rich Californian businessman came to the hotel to visit his sister, who was staying there, and a man also staying at the hotel had shot and killed him. Though I was never told why. I'm not saying that the stained splotch was the guy's blood, but my dad said that sometimes at night, when he was in bed, he could hear the sound of footsteps creaking over stained area. I don't remember what had pushed my grandmother to move out of the house, but it was soon after she had come home to find the bookshelf torn off the wall that they began to make precautions and preparations to leave. Also, apparently she had heard people in the house on several occasions, and said that she had even seen what looked like a person slinking around the house one night. One day my dad was helping his mother move things out of the house. She told him to move things out of the freezer into the kitchen. They had an old, broken-down, deep freezer that they used as a storage place. So my dad began clearing it out. And, when he opened a drawer on the top of the freezer, he saw that there were cigarettes, lighter, and fancy embroidered plates that his mum liked to collect. They had been missing those things for a while. Like I said once before, ghosts often move objects that they do not like. You might expect that now they'd moved out of that creepy old farmhouse, that the ghost stories would come to an end. That's not how it worked out. Since then, my dad and grandmother moved out. They sold the house to my Uncle James, who was in his early 60s at the time. For a time, it looked like all the spirits of that old farmhouse/hotel would leave Mr. James alone. But one night he was in his bedroom, and he heard a slow, plodding footsteps echoing up the hallway. Mr. James, who'd been reclining in a chair and reading a book, looked up to see a man standing in the doorway to his bedroom. Their back was turned, apparently looking at a painting that hung up on the hallway wall. "Hey!" yelled my uncle. "Who the hell are you?" The man turned around to face him. The man was short, shaggy black hair and a goatee, sad blue eyes and a blue jumpsuit, overalls. Mr. James was only allowed a fleeting glance, however, since the man then vanished into thin air in front of him. A few minutes later, my grandmother received a phone call saying, "Someone's in the house." Upon hearing that, she went to check on Uncle James, who, when he got to the farmhouse, was sitting on his bed, shaking like a leaf, with a shotgun cradled in his arms, pointing at the door. From then on, whenever they came to Uncle James' farmhouse, he would tell them crazy stories about being dragged from bed into the hall by an invisible person and slapped, punched, and bit repeatedly. Gosh, that's crazy. That would happen every night since that night when he first saw the man. No matter what he did, Mr. James could never stop this invisible man from attacking him, and when it dragged him down the hall, it never went into the parlor for some reason. And one day, my dad had to stay over. I've got a phone call. You'll have to forgive me for a moment, but I'll be back. All right, I have returned from the phone call. Sorry about that, and I appreciate you guys waiting for me. Let's continue. Dad had to stay over at Uncle James' house. I believe he was 14 years old at the time. I don't really know why. He never told me why. Now, Uncle James was a little kooky, but you can't really blame him, not with all he's gone through. He told my dad to sleep in the parlor, saying that it never came into the parlor room. My dad didn't believe in ghosts, and he wanted to see this mysterious man for himself. Uncle James did not think that was a good idea, though trying to see the man that was. He finally relented, telling him that he didn't mind as long as he promised to stay in the parlor. Mr. James also insisted that he sleep with a magic blanket, which was a regular quilted blanket that was supposedly meant to keep him safe. My dad said okay, recognizing and agreeing might be easier than arguing with him. That night he stayed awake, hoping to see the man, although not falling asleep was hard to do, except when he saw the man at exactly midnight, like Uncle James had told him. My dad said he felt the man before he even saw it, if you know what I mean. The man didn't come into the parlor, like Uncle James said. It just stood in the doorway and stared at my father, and then, just like that, it disappeared. When the grandfather clock in the parlor announced it was 6, the door to Uncle James' bedroom squeaked open and footsteps creaked up the hallway to the parlor. My dad, thinking that it was the man, covered himself with the magic blanket. Mr. James appeared in the doorway and coughed. Matt, is that you?" he asked. "Yeah," my dad responded. "I'm here." "Ah," said Uncle James softly. "I told you the magic blanket would work." "I think I saw the man," my dad said. "Did you?" Uncle James asked, rather distractedly. "And you know what? The man never came for me last night." Eventually, Mr. James died, from a heart attack, I believe. Not from anything unusual, and since Uncle James had no children, the farmhouse passed back to my grandmother, who wanted nothing more to do with the place. One day, my grandmother was in her house when she happened to look up at a time to see a short man in blue overalls and a black goatee walk up the driveway of the house. The man walked up to the steps of the porch and paced back and forth on the porch. He then stopped at the doorway of the house and disappeared. My dad said that my grandmother thinks the ghost was a family ghost, although I'm not sure what that means. I've had a few other ghost stories concerning my family, or at least strange happenings, but since they all have nothing to do with the old farmhouse or my Uncle James, I will simply end my story here. My old home. A haunting. I swear my old home, from when I was a kid, was haunted. I lived in my old home until I was 9 years old, before we moved, and I had numerous weird things happen to me in that old place. It was a terrace house on a council estate. It always had a strange feeling to it, thinking back on it. So, in the evening I would put my clothes in a washing basket, but for some reason I could never bring myself to go past my parents' bedroom, even when they weren't in there. But only at night. During the day I was fine. I would throw my clothes into the basket and rush into my bedroom. Well, one night I got a really good reason. I'd walked out of my bedroom to put my clothes in a basket, and 2 arms were sticking out of the bedroom. They were just sticking out, doing nothing. I threw my clothes into the basket so fast and noped my way back to my bedroom, literally jumping into my bed. Another time, it was early morning. I wanted a drink from the kitchen. So I went downstairs, and I saw that my mum and dad were still in bed, asleep. And as I walked down, we had a mirror at the bottom of the stairs, which could let you see into the kitchen. I saw someone that looked like my mum walking around in the kitchen. I very quickly went back upstairs, checking again in my parents' bedroom, and yep, both of them were still there. And the last thing, this was the most persistent stuff. I would hear my name being shouted by what sounded like my mum. I would go down to see what she wanted, to her confusion, and quite often it felt like something was twirling my hair around a finger. This would happen all day when I stayed in, all day in capitals. When we eventually moved, it all suddenly had stopped. Day 1, nothing, and no incidents in the new house. So do you think my old home was haunted? Because I do. And I think whatever it was really focused on me. Because years later, when I told my mum, she was quite shaken and scared by it. Nothing of this regularity happened to them. She got a few things, but nothing like I ever did. Well, everyone, if you've made it this far into the evening, and I wonder who is still awake with us, but if you're here with me, I so appreciate you. And I'd like to ask if you have a moment. This is a very small but growing channel. If you do have a moment, just to subscribe. If you like to hear ghost stories, I release these all the time, and so there'll be frequent content for you to find. Be sure to hit that notification bell, and it will help you find my new stuff. But yes, without further ado, sleep tight.